Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. And if you're new, welcome. My name is Adelina and I make videos about living in my tiny house on wheels and living a more intentional life. I am not in my tiny house today. I'm actually out and about doing errands, and I thought I would just do a quick little chat with you guys. And the reason is that on July 8th, so just a few weeks ago, I actually celebrated my 3rd year anniversary in my tiny house on wheels. And I thought it might be nice for you guys to get how everything is going in my tiny house on wheels. So yeah, that's what today's video is going to be. So if that's of interest, stay tuned. And for those of you wondering, yes, that's my van. Oh, it's a glorious day. It's going to get pretty hot here a little bit later on, but for right now, it's just perfect. I don't know if you can hear, but there's a train going by in the distance. So if you can hear that, I apologize for that sound. So yeah, 3 years in the tiny house, which kind of blew my mind when I realized it, because it just has flown by. And it feels like, honestly, if I had to say, what does it feel like to live in my tiny house on wheels after 3 years, I'd say it just feels like I've always lived in it. I've always been meant to live in it. It's just the most natural and comfortable thing in the world for me. It's hard to remember back to when I lived in a foundation built house. I had my townhouse condo for quite a few years, and before that, obviously, I was, well, not obviously, before that I was married, and we had a great big, I would say, house, 3-bedroom, full basement that was developed, that sort of thing, big yard. And my dream for moving tiny was born out of a desire to live a more intentional life, like I say in the intro on my videos. And what do I mean by that? I just didn't want to be tied to a certain spot anymore. I didn't want to be at the mercy of property taxes and special assessments. And if you live in a condo or a strata where there are association fees, condo fees that need to be paid, you know that there is always the potential and almost the eventuality that you will be called to put in money into a pool as a special assessment to do upgrades or repairs to the property. In my case, it was boilers that needed to be done, replaced, and a fisherman's gone by, and a new roof they needed to put onto the units in my phase. And so the first special assessment happened probably about 5 or 6 months after I had moved in. Now, keep in mind, I had moved in with 2 young kids. They were 10 and 4, and no money. I had managed to put the down payment down on the condo and scrape enough together to get moved in. I called on a lot of my friends to help me get the place ready. It needed painting and sort of cosmetic things. So when I moved in, I didn't have a spare cent. And when that special assessment came by, I was devastated, in tears actually. And I remember calling the management company and saying, I don't have the money. And, like, you can't get blood from a stone. And the very nice lady on the other end of the phone, she totally sympathized, and she's like, well, you could do it in payments and things like that. But I was in tears because I just did not have the funds. And I didn't expect it, because we had done our due diligence. When you buy a condo, you always want to get all the paperwork, and you go to the management company to see if there are any outstanding amounts due on previous special assessments and all of that. You get their board meeting minutes and condo association minutes, and my lawyer and I, we went through all of that, and there was nothing that could have been anticipated. So the condos that I lived in were heated by boilers, and they had some serious issues with them, and they needed to replace them, and it ended up being a very, very expensive thing. And so part of the rules with condo associations here in Alberta, at least, is that they have to have a certain amount of reserve capital in an account for special for emergencies, things like that. So when they use that money up, they then have to replenish that account. And so they had a special assessment, and for my unit, because it was based on square footage, it was about $4,000. So that was devastating. I realized very early on that I had no control over that. I guess it's no different than if you own a house and, you know, suddenly you need a new roof or something like that. But I just didn't expect that, given that we had been so careful about doing our due diligence. After that, the condo fees went up the next year, and they actually went up every year that I was there, a little bit, almost every year. Again, something I had no control over. And then 2 years before I left, there was another special assessment for some roof repairs. And I just, while I loved living there, I really hated that I was at the mercy of those things coming up and those costs increasing, and I had no control over them. That was something I really wanted to get away from. I wanted to have more control over those sorts of expenses. I wanted to reduce my debt load. I wanted to be able to pick up and move without having to go through the expenses and process of getting a realtor, selling a property, paying to move, then, you know, buying a new property, paying to move in, and all of those things. And it just seemed to me that I didn't want to own land anymore, because I was tied to one specific spot, and I wanted to be able to move my home if I wanted to, for work and for just personal pleasure. So when I first discovered tiny houses on the internet, I was hooked right away, because I've always loved small spaces. I lived in a trailer, grew up in a mobile home in the Northwest Territories. So, you know, I was used to, and it was a small one, not like these double wides that you see now, with 3 of us kids, and I loved it. And so I've always loved small spaces. That's why I converted the van into a camper van. I really love the idea of being able to have everything you need in a very small space. So it became my dream, even though I knew it wasn't something that I could do right away, because my kids were still at home and dependent. So I started dreaming about tiny houses about 5 years before I actually ever built one, certainly before I moved into one. But it gave me something to focus on, to dream about, while I was slogging through the day-to-day of just trying to get my life back on track, get my finances under control, and raise my kids, focus on them, because they really needed me to be 100% focused on them. Into my tiny house. When I took possession of my tiny house just over 3 years ago, the day that I drove down there to follow her home, I didn't need to do that. The company I had hired was going to bring her from Lethbridge to Calgary, and I had no doubt that they were going to be doing a very good job and a safe job, and she would arrive safely. But I really wanted to be there. I wanted to be there to film her coming out of the shop. I wanted to be there to film her going down the road. I wanted to be there to film her arriving at her new home, at our new home. He did it! Woo! and it was such an exciting day. I couldn't sleep the night before. I couldn't eat that morning. I couldn't eat all day, actually, until my friend managed to get me to sit down long enough to feed me because she had brought food. But I was so excited because I knew this was going to be the beginning of one of the most important chapters of my life. And it just felt monumentous for such a small thing. Some people are maybe thinking that, it's not a big deal, Adelina, it's just a house. You just took possession of a house. You didn't even build it yourself. But I think you're missing the point if that's what's in your mind right now, because I came from a place where I had very little control of my world. I have very little control over the things that were happening. In fact, my life felt like it was happening to me, and I intentionally did what I needed to do over a long period of time. So this wasn't something that happened overnight, but I did what I needed to do so that I could then happen to my life, if that makes sense. I didn't want to be at the mercy of so many things. I mean, there's always things in your life you have no control over, obviously. But I wanted to reduce those things, take back control, and let go of a lot of things that didn't matter anymore, or that I had thought were important, but they were important for the wrong reasons. They were important because somebody else thought they were important, or I felt like I had to be doing what somebody else wanted. So the tiny house for me embodies that. It embodies, excuse me, it embodies me taking control, but also letting go, if that makes any sense. And I hope it does, because what I learned was, and really absorbed, was that I needed to focus on the things that I could control, let go of the things I couldn't control, and really appreciate the things that I had, instead of focusing on what I didn't have. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in past videos or not, but I used to go through the world, and my old boss, he's not old, but my old boss, my previous boss, who was a mentor and is now still a mentor and a very great friend, he used to remind me fairly regularly that I always came to things from a scarcity mindset, a place of lack, that the worst was going to happen, that there would never be enough, that I would never, those sorts of thoughts. And so with his help, and with doing a lot of work and failing a lot as well, and it's still a work in progress, I have learned to move through the world from a place of abundance, from a mindset of what I have is pretty damn good. And I'm very, very lucky to live in the country I live in, to live in the place that I live in, to have the economic wherewithal that I have, to have the health that I have, the people around me that I love. Everything that I have is already pretty great. And then also the mindset that it's just getting better. One of the things I admired about him so much was that he walks through the world with this absolute belief that things will work out. He does the hard work, he does what he needs to do, but he just has this innate belief that there's always enough, that there will always be more around the corner, that there is not scarcity, and that things will work out. And they almost always do for him, because of that mindset. Because when you, in general, obviously, but when you look for lack, you see lack. When you look for abundance, you see and find abundance. It's kind of uncanny that way, and that's obviously simplistic the way I'm describing it, because it's not just riding Faith Airlines and just sort of, everything will be all right. No, you do what you need to do. You focus on the things that you do have control over, on the work that you can do, and then you let the rest go, because that's the negative stuff, and you focus on being grateful for the positive stuff that's already there, and have absolute expectation and confidence in knowing that more of the good stuff is coming. And it's the law of attraction, I guess, at its core. That book, The Secret, and the whole concept of law of attraction really helped me get over a really big hump or valley, I guess, where I was at a point in my life where I just could not see how things would ever get better. I was in a job that was very toxic, for a boss who was a sociopath and a narcissist. But I had 2 young kids that I was solely responsible for, financially and emotionally, and I felt like I was trapped and I had no choice. And reading that book, watching the movie, learning more about it, really embodying it, meditating, and all of those things helped me change my mindset. Because there's a line in the movie where one of the people says, most people don't allow themselves to ever believe that something good will happen, because they just can't imagine how it would happen, how it would come to be. I'm paraphrasing. And that struck me like a 2x4 across the forehead, because that was me. And so what I started to do was just visualize during my meditations, and as I went through the world, just visualize already it happening. It was, I didn't, what they said was not my responsibility. I was to focus on the what, and then do the small things every day that got me closer to that what, but not focus on the how, just focus on the what. And I was very detailed in visualizing what my future was, not would be, but was. And that's a really important distinction, because would be is always in the future, was is now, and so you want it to be something that you visualize right in front of you versus something that's always going to be out there. Again, it's a concept that took me a while to wrap my brain around, and I know that this sounds woo, but it worked for me, because what it did, it was change my mindset. I didn't worry. I stopped obsessing about the fact that I couldn't see how, and I just focused on the what, and down to the detail. I imagined what my day would be like every day. I'm getting up, this is what I'm doing. This is the job that I'm in. This is the relationship that I have. All of those things, and it just put me in that mindset of being happy and grateful and content, so that I could do the hard stuff every day. The stuff that isn't glamorous, that doesn't get onto YouTube, the staying up nights worrying about my kids, and worrying about bills, and working late and having to find childcare because my boss insisted, and all of those things I was able to get through, because I visualized what I wanted. And I guess that's sort of what I mean by living an intentional life, and why I'm so grateful and proud of the life that I've created right now, after 3 years living in my tiny house. I didn't really intend this to be a philosophical discussion, or even a discussion about the law of attraction, or living intentionally, but I can't discuss my life right now and my life in the tiny house without bringing that into it, because it's what allowed me to create it. And it still required a lot of work and commitment and dedication and slogging, and doing all the unfun stuff. But because I had a very clear picture of what I wanted to be living in a tiny house. I wanted to be living in a beautiful location. I wanted to be working this type of job, I wanted to, those sorts of things. Because I was very clear about that, it helped me get through the harder stuff that I had to do, which was really important to me to be able to, which really helped me to be able to do that. I don't think the fisherman caught anything. Anyways, yeah, after 3 years of living in the tiny house here in Calgary, I'm definitely ready for a change. Not as far as living in the tiny house. I can't picture that changing ever, certainly not for a very long time. Down the road, I wouldn't mind building a tiny log cabin. I think that would be really cool, with a fireplace and a little loft in it and everything like that, with just miniature. But that's, you know, at that point I would also maybe like a little piece of property, but that's years down the road. But right now, for this next year in particular, my focus is on moving to Vancouver Island, to getting settled into a nice secluded spot in the countryside, in nature, you know, being able to grow at least a portion of my food and living a little bit more off-grid. I want to get some solar panels and generate at least some of my own energy, that sort of thing. Because for me, that's the next step in becoming even more independent and less focused on what the government is doing. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but less focused on what the government's doing and what the economy is doing, that sort of thing. If I can, I'll be in a climate where I can grow a good portion of the year, and if I can minimize my reliance on utilities, I think that would be a big relief, because right now everything is getting more and more expensive. Food is ridiculous. The economy is in a bit of a roller coaster, and governments around the world are a little scary. You know, I love being in Canada. I think we're very lucky to be here, but you know, in general, governments are always a little. So if I can get away from the city, get away from a lot of people, start to live a more natural sort of life. I'm not going to say homestead because I don't have property, but just become a little bit more self-reliant. That's my goal for this next year with the tiny house. By this time next year, when we have our chat on my 4th anniversary, my surroundings are going to look very different, and my life, I think, will be calmer and more peaceful, and I will look forward to sharing every step of that process with you guys as well. I hope you've enjoyed this little chat. It was very impromptu. I'm not going to do a bunch of editing in here. I just kind of wanted to share my feelings about what I went through to make it a reality for me, with the understanding that I'm very fortunate to live in the country that I do, and have the economic means that I do, because I certainly know that for many of you out there, that is not the case. Anyways, guys, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying safe. Remember, in a world where you can be anything, be kind, because the world needs a lot more of that right now. And I love you, and I'll see you next Sunday.